Coach G, I want to ask you a little bit about the history of STEP, because I think we have to put in a context. The fact that Blessin saw it for the first time at a historically black college, I think, is important. Could you talk to us a little bit about where STEP comes from and what its historical roots are?
Hello, everyone. I'm Coach G. STEP came from Africa, and it came to America. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thank you. And it came to America through the transatlantic slave trade. And then it was made popular through Black Greek fraternities, sororities, community, schools, churches, youth groups. And it's really predominant in the African-American community. And hopefully with this movie, it will be more mainstream. People will be doing it all over. And it's already done all over the world. But again, it's really predominant in the African-American community. STEP is making music with your body or percussion with your body. Clapping, stomping, shouting, spoken word, cheerleading moves, gymnastics, stomping, patting parts of your bodies, literally making music with your body.
Amanda, I think it's fair to say that almost every documentary filmmaker does not end up making the film that he or she first imagines they're going to tell. And I think that's absolutely the case with this. So before we talk about the movie that you ended up making, I want to talk about your family's history with the school and how that led to the first iteration of what you were going to make about this STEP.
So I'm a Broadway producer in my other life, and I make musicals and plays on Broadway. And on the side of my Broadway career, I started making shorts about first-generation students going to college and girls' education. And I just was always inspired when I told the story in short form of a first-generation student going to college and what that meant for their family. And I became involved with a group of schools called the Young Women's Leadership Schools in New York, which are 5 all-girls public schools, 6th through 12th grade, with a 100% graduation rate. And I was just blown away by these schools. I am born and raised in Baltimore. My mom's born and raised in Baltimore, has been an activist there my whole life for women and girls. I grew up with a domestic violence hotline being run from my dining room table. So I had the kind of mother that I could suggest maybe she should replicate a school like these schools I was working with in Baltimore. And she did. And she recruited her daughter to make films for her. And I did. So I met these young ladies when they were 11 years old. And I started making shorts just to promote the school and promote the good work that everyone was doing there. And I knew that the STEP team had started, but I wasn't familiar with STEP. It wasn't something that was a part of my culture growing up. I didn't know about the rich history coming from Africa. I didn't know about it being a collegiate sport now in North America. But in the 8th grade, I was filming Blessin for another project in New York. She was actually interviewing Sherilyn Eiffel at the ACLU. Wow. And she looked at me and she said, you know, the next time you come to school with cameras, you really need to come film our STEP team. And I said, okay, because I was always drawn to Blessin. You know, she kind of linked her arm with mine when she was 11 and said, you're a Broadway producer, I'm going to be on Broadway. And I believed her. And I just remember walking in and my heart stopped beating because with every stomp, with every clap, with every breath, they were expressing themselves. And that's what happens in a great musical. You know, in a great musical, a character can't speak anymore, so they sing to express their fears and their hopes and their dreams. And that's what they were doing. And I knew them well enough at that point to know that I saw every range of girl on that team and that there was a lot of stories that needed to be told.
Well, and I think the story that you were going to tell and the stories that you were involved in changed dramatically when Freddie Gray was murdered. So I want to ask you how your approach to this story changed after his death and what direction the film went into after he was killed.
Well, we were already filming. Freddie Gray was killed in their junior year, in April of their junior year, and it was a rough year for the STEP team. Blessin had a rough year at school academically, and through a lot of different circumstances ended getting kicked off the team, and it was a real gut punch for all of us because she was the heart and soul and the captain and founder of the team. And I watched these young women pull her back in, and I watched the school use STEP to pull her back in, and it was incredible. And I thought, this is going to be amazing. They are the founding class of this school, and they are going to be the first in their families to go to college. We always, when I met with all the families and all the girls in the 9th grade to talk about making a documentary, I said, let's change the conversation about Baltimore. with these young women in the step team. And then when Freddie Gray was killed, I just knew that that was the start of the story. That was the beginning. That was the jumping off point. And in a musical, you know, you always have to have a ticking clock. You always have to have something universal that everyone can relate to. And so all my footage that I had filmed from 9th through 11th grade, I put to the side, and I created a trailer that opened just like the movie opened, a 3-minute trailer, with Freddie Gray. When I saw that mom go into the riot and pull out her son and hit him over the head, I was like, those are my mothers on the step team. That's my Isha. She would do that. And I just knew that was the images that needed to start. And then we literally needed to see them stamped out. We needed to see the feet come down. For us, Freddie Gray's death turned the flame up in all of us, and I think gave these young women and their families the courage and the strength to really tell the story.
Coach G and the girls, when you're talking about the way in which you can take Freddie Gray's murder and make it part of your step, what were the conversations that you had as a team and as a teacher, and what were the things that you wanted to bring to light, not just through performance, but through rehearsal and talking about his death that you think were important? So Coach G, why don't you start, and we'll talk to the girls as well.
For me, what was important was for them to realize Bliss is a wonderful, magical place, but it's a very small charter school in Baltimore filled with so many people who love them and believe in them and tell them that the sky's the limit, and that's very true. But there's so many people who are going to trip you up in the way of trying to reach the sky, who are going to pull you back. And as young black women, you know, we have it twice as hard. And you don't walk into a room and people expect you to be equally as adequate as they are. And that's just the reality. So I wanted them to be realistic about what is out there in the real world. They were always taught to be self-advocates. They were always taught to stand up for themselves and have confidence and all of those things. But my conversation was, how do you feel about this? More social-emotional. How do you feel about what happened? Where were you? What were you doing? What were you thinking? What was going through your mind? When we did that routine for Black Lives Matters, it was a Baltimore routine and a Baltimore step competition. And a lot of the competitions give you guidelines as to what you can make the theme. And the first thing that came to my mind was, it was almost a year after Freddie Gray died. And I was like, oh, definitely, I'm going to do Black Lives Matters. Because after Freddie Gray was murdered, somebody else was murdered. And then somebody else was murdered. So these are things that I wanted them to understand. As young black women, when you walk out of these doors, it could be you. It could be me. It could be any of you. And I think that it was important for me to change the conversation about Black Lives Matters to not being a hateful thing or saying that other lives don't matter, because that's not what that statement is about. It's about the fact that everyone has children and no one wants to bury their child. And the reality is, if these young girls going to a charter school that's college prep are putting their hands up and saying, don't shoot, that's exactly what these young men and women who were victims of these crimes, of these atrocities, that's exactly what happened to them. So if you can imagine them in that place, then you can think like, oh, this could be my child. You have that empathy to think this could be my child.
That's beautifully said. Blessin, Cori, and Tayla, what do you think about what your coach just said about the ways in which you can use step to tell a story and come together and express something that you're feeling and share it with a bigger audience?
I completely agree. When we started off in 6th grade, it was just something fun to do. It looked cool, and we really liked the costumes and makeup and stuff. But over the years, it really started to become so much more than just entertainment, and I think that's something that's really important that we appreciate Coach G for, because she helped us to, you know, kind of cross over from just entertaining to also educating people, because there are people who don't understand where we come from or who don't understand the things that we go through, the adversities that we face on a daily basis, whether those be social or political or academic or with our families. And really, STEP is really just that platform for us to share our experiences.
I agree with Cori and Coach G. Actually, a lot of coaches, we've had a lot of coaches and their focus was entertainment, and no one ever really taught us how to educate when we step. And mostly we learned that people listen to you when you're with a group and you're loud and you're stomping and you're clapping and you have fun while you're doing it. And I think that when you're educating, you should have fun while you're doing it and make sure that you have a purpose.
Laura, I want to ask you a little bit about how you incorporate.
Don't ask me anything.
I'm not. I'm going to ask you one thing about incorporating music into a story in which music and rhythm figure so prominently. When you were working with Raphael Sadiq and trying to figure out how you're going to place music in this, you obviously, pun intended, don't want to step on the stepping. So what do you look for? How does music accentuate what is already an incredibly emotional story? What is the texture and depth that it can give a documentary like this?
Well, they're heroes. So I think that the first thing to do is to write music that's heroic but intimate, and that it's a small story about everyday heroes, but of course it's a huge story. So I think that was the challenge and the goal of it, and also just to stay out of the way. Yeah, which is not me, really. You know, I'm a kind of get in the way kind of gal, but with Amanda, I think that was the discipline here. Stay out of the way, set up the sort of the theatricality of it, come into play. I mean, important montages is the pyramid montage, and then of course the song at the end. Those are the places where we were allowed to shine musically, and every place else we're kind of like, don't do too much.
By the way, I just want to say I've done a lot of panels here. I think this is the first panel I've done with 6 women up here.
Yes.
So, and I think that's amazing because I also think this is a story about women. I think it's a story about moms. Yes. And I think we should give a shout out to all the moms.
Yeah.
You guys, thank you so much for coming out.